A 13-year-old black boy, often lost in thought during class, is suddenly called upon by his teacher. He's forced to stand and face a math equation far beyond his grade level. Some classmates chuckle, others look on with doubt, skepticism in their eyes. But what they don't know is that the boy standing at the board is a hidden math prodigy. The midday sun casts warm streaks of light across the polished floors of Riverside Middle School. It's early autumn in Atlanta, Georgia, and the classrooms hum with a quiet buzz of students chatting, chairs scraping, and papers shuffling. Room 3002 is no different, filled with the restless energy of 8th graders settling in for math class. Near the back, by the window, sits Jamal Carter, a quiet 13-year-old black boy who always takes his usual seat. His presence is subtle, making it easy for him to blend into the background. His sharp brown eyes, though often distant, wander beyond the window, more interested in the world outside than the lesson in front of him. As he places his notebook on the desk, his posture is relaxed, maybe a little too relaxed, one arm draped lazily on the table while the other props up his chin. Outside, trees sway gently, a bird hops along the fence. The world beyond the glass seems far more interesting than the noise in the classroom. But Jamal isn't inattentive by choice. His mind works much faster than the class pace. Though numbers and equations excite him, the slow, repetitive lessons feel uninspiring. Instead of raising his hand or engaging, he lets his thoughts drift, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of the world outside. His notebook, mostly empty where assignments should be, holds something special, its margins filled with advanced equations and solutions, problems he's challenged himself to solve. At the front of the room, Mrs. Amanda Thompson stood with her arms crossed, her sharp gaze sweeping over the students as they settled in. A no-nonsense teacher with years of experience, she was known for her strict approach and high expectations. Her neatly styled hair and tailored blazer only added to her commanding presence. She took pride in recognizing potential in her students and pushing them when she felt they weren't reaching it. But today, her patience was wearing thin. A neat stack of math test results sat on her desk. While a few students had done well, most had struggled. She didn't tolerate mediocrity, and seeing so many low scores made her question if her students were even trying. Picking up the papers, she started handing them back, offering quick remarks, decent work to some and you need to study more to others. When she reached Jamal's desk, she paused. His test sat at the top of the pile, a bold red 100% circled at the top. It wasn't the first time he had aced a test, yet his lack of class participation frustrated her. Without a word, she placed the paper on his desk, pressing her lips into a thin line before moving on. "All right, listen up." Her voice cut through the classroom noise, instantly silencing the chatter. Leaning against her desk, she scanned the students with sharp eyes. "Most of you did okay," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But a lot of you are still struggling with concepts we've been covering for weeks." Jamal barely paid attention, his chin resting on his hand, eyes drifting to the window again. The rustling leaves outside seemed far more interesting than another one of Mrs. Thompson's lectures. But what he didn't notice was her gaze shifting toward him. "This is basic algebra," she continued, her voice rising. "You need to understand this if you want to succeed in high school, in college, in life." Her eyes locked onto Jamal's distant expression, irritation flashing across her face. "Jamal Carter," she snapped. Jamal flinched, his hand slipping from his chin as every head in the room turned toward him. His heart pounded, heat rushing to his face. "Why, yes, ma'am," he mumbled, barely audible. Mrs. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "You seem very interested in something outside that window," she said, nodding toward it. "Care to share what's so fascinating?" A few students chuckled under their breath. Jamal hesitated, opening his mouth but quickly shutting it, unsure of what to say. Mrs. Thompson wasn't amused. "Let's see if you've been paying attention," she said sharply. "Come up here." The room fell silent. Jamal's chair scraped against the floor as he stood slowly. Eyes followed him, some filled with amusement, others with curiosity. "She's gonna roast him," a voice muttered. "He never talks." "Bet he doesn't even know what's going on," another student whispered, stifling a laugh. Jamal swallowed hard, his palms sweaty as he walked to the front, every step making his heart race faster. The whiteboard seemed impossibly far away. Mrs. Thompson stood beside it, marker in hand, her expression unreadable. With deliberate strokes, she wrote a complex equation, far beyond anything they had covered. Then, turning to Jamal, she held out the marker. "Go ahead," she said, almost like a challenge. "Show us what you've got." The marker felt cold in his fingers. He stared at the equation, his mind racing. Whispers and quiet snickers filled the room. Pressure. His heart pounded. For a moment, he thought about handing the marker back, just walking away. But something stopped him, a voice inside, reminding him of the countless hours he had spent solving problems just like this. This wasn't about Mrs. Thompson or his classmates. It was about him. Jamal took a deep breath and began to write. At first, his strokes were slow, cautious. But as he moved through each step, his hand grew steadier. The classroom whispers faded. Some students had expected him to freeze, but instead, they watched in shock as he worked through the equation. "Wait, is he actually doing it?" a girl whispered. "Looks like it," her friend replied, leaning forward. Jamal's mind worked fast, breaking the equation down, simplifying variables, eliminating unnecessary steps. His hand moved quicker now, the squeak of the marker against the board filling the silence. He wasn't just solving the problem. He was dismantling it. The room grew still. Students who had laughed before were now watching, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Even Mrs. Thompson stepped closer, scanning each line of his work. Jamal paused, double-checking his steps. Then he wrote the final answer, circled it, and clicked the marker shut. Silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, applause. Soft at first, then louder. Jamal turned, his heart still racing, to see his classmates staring, not with mockery, but with respect. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, tracing each step of his solution with her finger. Then, finally, she spoke. "This is correct." The class erupted. Jamal stood there, unsure how to react. His cheeks burned, but for the first time, it wasn't from embarrassment. It was pride. And for the first time, he realized maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe he was meant to be seen.